Hi, everybody. Welcome. Great to see you all. Alana, Jen, Jillian, Danica, Kimberly, Sherry. Excellent. Megan, Nancy. Awesome. Good. Good, good.
Can you see me, Connie?
Kimberly, is that you?
Yeah.
You are a black screen, Kimberly.
Why is that?
I don't know.
It looks like your camera's covered.
It's not though, hey? That's weird.
Yeah. Sometimes these things happen. So yeah, it looks like the camera's just not on.
You know what? It's closed now, but according to...
Good morning.
Hey, hi, Jim. Kimberly's doing some troubleshooting around her camera there. Welcome, everybody. We have a big agenda for us today and a couple things I want to tell you before we get started. I actually have next week off. I'm attending something for my own development. And so Lori Godin is going to be with you next week for your first activity session. So you'll have a good time with Lori. She and I have been working together for many years now. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that next week. So I wanted to let you know that. So same time, same station. It's an activity session. So you'll be practicing the skills that we're talking about today, which is one of the reasons why I want to move ahead. One of the assignments I gave you that was not an assignment originally was to review the story about the case study of Becky Rhodes, and she's on page 20. And I just want to see if folks have had a chance to get to know Becky, because we're actually going to use her in our conversation today. So go ahead and turn to page 20 if you hadn't had a chance. Does Becky sound like somebody you would meet, or you could adjust that a little bit to be somebody you would encounter? Jim, Nancy, Jillian, Jan, Sherry, Stacy, Dan, would you see Becky?
It's looked kind of familiar to me. Although to be honest, I'm on a different location today and I left my MI book there.
Okay.
At the last office I was in, but I did read it before we
Good.
Or after our last session, I guess.
Kimberly, you made it. Excellent. Yeah. So other folks, so Stacy's told us about Becky. Other folks, Becky, somebody you might encounter? Maybe you have to make her pregnant, or?
Yeah, I would have to make her pregnant.
Yeah. That's okay. So she's pregnant for you, Jan.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a client that I would have every day in my work for sure.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good. Yeah, we want her to be somebody who's familiar to you. So that's good. All righty. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm looking over here at our screen. We're going to go ahead and get started then. And so, Stacy, I will try to remember how to help you with anything that's in the book, right? Yeah, that's awesome. That stuff happens, right? Okay. Looks like we have almost everybody here. So hope everybody's been having a decent week. It's only Tuesday, right? A lot can happen. All righty. So the first thing I want you to do is to think about Becky. And so, you know, in your mind, imagine that you're going to be meeting Becky tomorrow, maybe. And so I'd like you to do is, and there's actually a place in your workbook on page 23 to write this down. There's a little square there to write this down. To think about Becky and what are some questions you would ask Becky to engage with her on the first time that you are going to meet her. And I'm just going to actually turn on my little timer here. This is like speed dating. You have a minute to think of what you're going to ask Becky to connect with her. So just whatever your first thought is, go ahead and just take a minute and think about questions you would ask Becky to engage with her. Okay, there's the timer. So we had your speed dating. Okay. Um, so hang on to that. We're going to use that in just a minute. And so I just have a question, I guess, for all of you thinking about the skills in MI. You've probably heard of these skills before because we like acronyms in MI. So we're going to be talking about the OARS skills, right? So what you use to row a boat. So OARS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So these are the key communication skills that, again, many of you have been introduced to before, and we use these in two ways. We talked about the spirit of MI. So we're going to use these to help us really embody that spirit of MI with the people we're working with. And then we're also going to use them technically in our conversations when we learn more about how we use them to strategically respond to when people are talking about change, okay? So that's those basic skills that we use in the conversation. And so you'll see this symbol in the book whenever we're talking about the OARS skills. So the first thing we're going to talk about are those open-ended questions. And this is your basic, English class. Open-ended questions are questions that you can't answer with a one word, yes or no, or like when my kids were in school, how was school today? Fine. It's those kinds of questions. And we want to stay away from those questions for the most part because we want to be invoking. That's the spirit of MI. We want to use these things to evoke and to really understand the other person. There are some closed questions that actually don't work like a closed question. Like you've been introduced to brief action planning. When you ask somebody, is there anything you want to do for yourself in the next, or your health in the next week or two? Most people do not say yes or no. They will answer you with a full sentence. So it's technically a closed question, but it's very evocative. And there are brilliant closed questions. Sometimes you just need to ask a closed question just to bring something to a point. Now, as clinicians, we are very accustomed to using closed questions. They're in most of our assessments. When we're, like if you're in the diagnostic mode, you ask a lot of closed questions to rule in or rule out things. And so this is the part of the conversation where we're not doing assessment. This is the part of conversation where we're engaging with that other person. We're thinking about the focus. We're thinking about their actions in their own life. So this isn't the diagnostic part of our conversation. That's when we move in and out, of that directing, guiding, following. Okay. So the mental shift in MI is actually that the motivational part of the conversation is not about fact finding. Okay. Which is a big shift for a lot of us in our clinical world. For us as clinicians, we're kind of in the mode of, if I ask the right questions and learn all the parameters, I will be able to solve this problem and fix it. Okay, so we're not in that mode with MI. So why do you think we're not in that mode with MI? Why is fact finding not our goal? Love to hear you guys talk for a while.
Because the assumption is, I guess, that the solution lies within the other person, it's not coming from us. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so fundamentally that's kind of a different attitude to have. Like, I'm going to elicit information from you and then tell you how to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're trying to build rapport, trying to build a relationship and explore with them what's going on.
Yeah, which is very different than the clinical mindset, where I just need to figure out what the diagnosis is and prescribe the right therapy.
I think we're trying to understand from the client's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get deep, what's going on here. Exactly. Other folks' thoughts?
We want, it's Dana, we want to join with them. So to be collaborative, to kind of be part of their journey rather than I'm the expert in your life.
Yeah, that walking alongside part. Danica, were you going to say something?
Very similar.
Yeah, great. Because this is where the attitude really comes out. So thank you for that. That's really making good sense that you're there. And so now what I'm going to invite you to do is go ahead and look back at those questions that you wrote when you knew you were going to be meeting Becky, and just see if there are closed questions there that we might be able to figure out how to turn into an open-ended question, and also share some of our favorite open-ended questions. Some of us have learned to use these early on in the visit, like you said, about establishing rapport. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing right now so we can see each other as we talk. So looking back at your questions, did anybody have a bunch of closed questions that they can't figure out how to turn into open ones? We can help each other. So I'm not seeing anybody react to that. Does anybody have a question that is one of their favorite open-ended questions that they use to help connection?
What brought you in today?
What brought you in today?
What were you hoping to achieve, or what can I help with?
Other ideas?
Where would you like to go from here?
Just how's it going?
Yeah.
Like, how are you today? How's it going today?
Yeah.
Or can you tell me more about such and such?
Yeah, tell me more is what I call my back pocket open-ended question. Whenever I can't think of a question, just tell me more about this is a lovely thing to do. And open-ended questions usually start with what. They sometimes start with why, but you have to be careful about why, because sometimes it feels accusatory. So a why with a gentle tone of voice or a gentle exploration. How is another really good stem for an open-ended question. So tell me more about what, how, and why are typically the open-ended questions that we use the most.
So for me, like, I would have this information before I met with my client. So typically I would say, like, tell me about who Becky is. Like, how do you see yourself, right? Tell me about who you are.
Yeah.
So I like that. And then, typically we go to like a short-term goal.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, Kimberly, because you're really talking about opening up with something that really gives her a chance to establish her identity.
I want to know who she thinks she is, right? Because she knows herself better, really, than I know her or anybody else does. And it's important to me to understand where she's at.
Right. So I'm not going to dwell a lot on open-ended questions right now because we're going to be incorporating them into our conversation. And so just as a reminder, just to think about, keeping that open frame of mind as you move forward today and next week in the activity session, because you'll actually have some opportunity to practice using open-ended questions next week when you come along. But if you get stuck, tell me more. What, how, why? Okay. All right. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next bit here. So let me just get the screen back up because we're going to just go through some stuff that's in your workbook so you can follow along, and then this will also help for folks who don't have that. So we're moving on to the affirmations now. So here's the definition of an affirmation. And an affirmation is a statement that recognizes and acknowledges strengths or values that the person has not said, okay? So this is something that you see in that person that hasn't been verbalized by them. And it may be because you've known them in the past, or you've found out something about the way they're talking that you see a value. And so a value might be their family or their health or the well-being of their baby or loyalty to their friends or determination or resilience. So thinking about values and strengths. It could be intention too, that you see there's intention to make change. So you can affirm those things. And there's affirmations are really very interesting for when the people study language and they study how people respond to different parts of language. This is really fascinating research. And it turns out that when you use affirmations or that kind of affirmative speech, it's more likely that the person you work with is going to talk about change. So this is that strength-based, when people talk about strength-based, this is why that seems to work, okay? And so we use it to build relationships. We understand the other person, but we really want to provide support for change. And so the tricky thing about affirmations is we sometimes confuse them with other things we do. And so an affirmation or an acknowledgement, since affirmation is kind of a funny word, it can be compared to praise or a compliment. Okay. And a praise or a compliment don't actually work the same way. And you can see on the slide or in your book on page 25, the comparison of affirmations and praise. And any of you who have young children have probably been, hearing a bit about praise, because that's been talked about how you praise or how you acknowledge effort in children. And it seems to work the same way in our relationship with patients or clients that we serve. An affirmation really is recognizing that strength or value or intention. It's also honors this fellow human traveler on the earth for us, on the earth with us. And it usually starts with the word you. It's a way to just help yourself remember what an affirmation is. Praise, by contrast.
Sorry, Connie, can I ask
Sure.
a question?
You bet.
I am very delicate in you statements, and
Yes.
probably overtly and probably to my demise, I don't use you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I totally get that, because you can be really tricky. And this is thinking, and there's ways you can do an affirmation without the you, but sometimes the you is really a way of giving it back to that person for them to react to. So you may find other ways to do affirmations without the strength. So another way you can phrase it is you can say this, the value, the quality, the strength is important to you. Or you value, is the way you use the word you, but you could say you value this, right? So,
I guess
you might.
and I'm just thinking, and I don't know if this is where you were going with it, Danica, but it's like, you can always be tentative about it. It's like, you've really thought about this. Is that right? Like, you can always kind of check it out with the person and be tentative if you're worried that it's coming out sounding like, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
Directive, or I don't know, from a position of,
Yeah.
So there's kind of ways to soften it, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
if you're.
Yeah. I would caution you against saying, did I get that right on the end of it? Just say the statement with a tentative tone of voice, you really been thinking hard about this, or a soft tone of voice, and see how they react. But you could always say, this is important to you, would be another way to do an affirmation, Danica. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The contrasted, though, is starting the sentence with the word I, which is another thing that we fall into, that trap with it. And the difference between an affirmation and a praise or a compliment is that a praise or compliment really puts us in a place of actually judging another person, that we're in a position to judge another person, where an affirmation or acknowledgement is just a recognition of something that you see. It's not a judgment about them. So we're going to actually do a quiz to try to determine those two things. And sometimes people worry about assumptions. So let me just talk a little bit about assumptions. So if you look at the definition of an assumption is where you state something because you believe it is true. And that's very different than an affirmation. I'm saying something I see. I don't know that it's true. I'm just offering it. And so an assumption comes with a prejudice to it, as opposed to an affirmation, or we're going to talk about reflection soon, which again, don't have a judgment with them. The intent behind it is to understand and connect with the other person. So a lot of it is about your intent. Does that make sense to folks? Watching for a few heads nodding or not. Keep that in mind, and then we'll think about that as we go forward. Okay.
I don't know if this makes sense at all, but I've heard it discussed in the past also too. Like, it's one thing to affirm someone's strengths, basically just reflect back some kind of strength or value. It's like, but when it isn't helpful, it was really kind of slipping into cheerleading is the word I've heard. Like, it's kind of hollow and empty, and you're just like, yeah, you can do it, but it's hollow. It isn't really rooted in, that true seeing of their strengths or values.
Yeah.
I don't know if that.
Thanks, Stacey. Yeah, and cheerleading is like continued use of praise or compliments. It's where it falls into cheerleading for me. I was actually listening to a recording this morning, and the person said, fantastic, over and over in this conversation. And so there's also a danger there. So what happens if you're the kind of person who likes to do that, and then one day you're having a bad day and you never say fantastic or good job to that person? What's the risk?
They'll assume that they're not doing a good job.
Yeah. And so go ahead, Jim.
Or you're not happy with them.
So even that, it comes from a very sincere place, that we want to be supportive of people and acknowledge their efforts, but the way we do it really seems to make a difference. Okay, so let's do this quiz and see if this will help illuminate this a little bit. So I'm going to show you 2 phrases, and these again are in your book, so you can either follow along on the screen or you can follow along in your book. And so we're just going to figure out which of these are affirmations and which of them are compliments. And there's some kind of, you have to really think them through. Is this about something more superficial, or is it about me judging you, or is it me recognizing something? Okay. So, I love your shoes. What do you think? Affirmation or compliment? Yeah, compliment. It's about something superficial. I think you're an incredible leader.
Compliment.
Yeah, because it's about me. I think this, right? Yeah. Okay. How could we turn that into an affirmation?
I noticed worked hard.
Just drop the I.
Yeah, you can drop the I.
You're an incredible leader.
You're an incredible leader.
Yeah. Or even be more specific, like you really managed that difficult conversation well in that meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. How about you face challenges with a good sense of humor?
Affirmation.
You make me laugh.
I'd call it a compliment.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's about something that you're doing that I'm receiving versus an observation about other things. Like you're making me do something. So
yeah, I put that in that category too. How about you have lovely hair? Compliment, yeah. You are really determined.
I think it's an affirmation.
And that's a back pocket affirmation, because most people you meet are determined. Now, they might not be determined in ways that you are right now thinking are helpful for them, but that determination sometimes can be a strength that they can then turn to something else in their life. So it's still a good quality, right, to acknowledge.
But I don't take that as I don't take that as an affirmation or a compliment. I like it tonally, especially if you are really determined, depending on the situation you're in, could be really facetiously received.
You have to be careful, right? A lot of it's about tone and situation. Yeah. You don't give up.
If I had to choose, I'd pick affirmation.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like saying you're really determined. Different words. Yeah. You love your family.
I think that could be the way as well, right?
Go ahead, talk about that.
Well, a lot of clients, I'd like to think that most of my clients have a good rapport with their family and that they're their support system. And with that comes respect, right? And love and whatever. So, and at the same time, it can be a compliment where maybe it could just be somebody personal in my life that's doing something special for their family. So it depends on what role I'm in, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought it was more of an affirmation, because it's like it's speaking to a strong value.
A value.
Or something that's really important to them.
Yeah, and that's generally the way it's taken, as a comment about a value. But I think Kimberly brings up, there's some nuances here, right? Without some of the context we don't know. And another way to say this, because I think Danica was bringing up, sometimes you is hard, is to say you value your family, or you could say, which does start with the word you, or you could say, caring for your family is important to you, or something like that, and still acknowledge that strength that person has.
But this is context dependent, right? Like you're not going to I'm not just going to walk up to you, Connie, and be like, you love your family. You're going to have shared with me, we would have been in a conversation, and I would have deduced from that interaction.
Yeah.
You really love your family.
Yeah, and you're holding it up to them, right? Because it's something you're putting together out of that conversation. You're holding it up to them and shining a light on that value or that strength. Yeah. Good. Okay. So let's try to go ahead. Like somebody was going to speak. Maybe I missed it. Okay. So thinking about Becky, how could you affirm Becky? So take a moment to recall Becky, and there's actually a place you can write for Becky on page 26, and we'll share a couple of these if you'd like, to get an idea about what are some strengths or values or intentions that you see in Becky's story. Go ahead and think about that for a moment and then call out some things that you're thinking about Becky. Anybody have a thought of something they might affirm for Becky?
You've worked really hard.
You've worked really hard. And she has, she's taken steps. What else could you affirm?
For resilience.
Okay. So you could say you're really resilient, or how else might you say that?
You have a lot of strength.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard thing, or it's hard to deal with, but you've done well, or you've done,
Mm-hmm.
you're resilient, you've grown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You'd say you're caring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your children are really important to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Helping other people is important to you.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a nice way to do it without the you word. Thanks, Alana. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit in there to affirm about Becky. And, you know, sometimes in speaking as a healthcare professional, I mean, we're taught this problem orientation. And so it's so hard sometimes to really focus on strengths. And folks who come from a social work background or a counseling therapy background typically can have more of a strength-based approach. So it's really important to be able to think about what are the strengths that this person brings here that we can, you know, call forth to address this issue. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you a tougher question. Is there someone you dread seeing or you find it very difficult to work with? It could be a coworker, it could be a family member even. It could be somebody you see on your schedule and your heart just drops a little bit and you think, oh, okay, you know, how am I going to be here for this person today? See if you can come up with an affirmation for that person. Okay.
And one of my favorite quotes recently is Abraham Lincoln. I really don't like him. I'll have to get to know him better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or maybe affirming. How are you doing thinking of about that person? And an affirmation. If you want to share, you can. You don't have to. But
I'm thinking of passive-aggressive affirmations.
oh, the truth comes out, Stacey.
Like you're really sure of yourself.
With a snarky tone? Yeah. Yeah, so much of it's tone and body language and sincerity, right? And people can pick that up in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm.
That's my concern, is the sincerity of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is how do you perceive, like, being genuine when it's something you're working on to find the strength to say, Connie,
Yeah.
blank, 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 right?
Yeah, and so I guess maybe it gets back to your intention, right? And so, you know, your intention is helping this person learn about themselves, right? And so I'm seeing this thing, and so I see this, you know, and I'm offering it to you as something to react to, right? Because that's how we get to know people, is this back and forth interaction. And I think people can pick up on the attention of your sincerity, for sure.
Yeah, sometimes less is more, Connie, you know, hey?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these are the kind of things that can really turn a conversation around, though. And I guess I'll tell you a little bit of a story about one of the reasons I'm so interested in affirmations is, you know, I get to interact with this lovely community of people who are teaching MI around the world. And one of the people I've had the great pleasure of learning from is a man named named Karl Aka von Forsberg, and he's worked in the prison system in Sweden. And in Sweden, they actually mandate that every person who works in their prison system learns MI. And so he's been involved in that for a really long time. And he worked in a men's prison. He's retired now. And one of the things that he said is that as he worked with the men in the prison, he found out that many of them had never had been affirmed for anything. You know, they'd never heard anybody acknowledge any of their strengths, any of their intentions, any of their values. And he just saw how transformative it was. And the research does kind of support that when you do an affirmation, you're more likely to hear the person talk about change and talk about positive direction. So I've just been really interested in how we can naturally and sincerely, you know, acknowledge people's strengths.
That's just, oh, sorry, Stacey. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like positive psychology, and I've been always interested in that, and more recently reignited my interest in that, and actively practicing seeing strengths. And it's like, you're making me think of this metaphor that they have in positive psychology, and it's basically like, if you have a boat, like the person is the boat, and if there's a hole in the boat, and that's the problem, you know, but there's also a sail, and the sail are your strengths. And it's like, if you only focus on fixing the problem, you might plug that hole, but you're not going to move anywhere. But if you use the strengths, that's the sail. That's what's actually going to get you moving somewhere. So it's, so I've been totally working on that, because in my former training, I was trained, I think, to be a lot more neutral. And so it's been a bit of a stretch for me to actually, you know, name those strengths when I see them. Name those strengths and values.
That's a great metaphor. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Connie, is what did that do for society, that your prison system is built on MI as opposed to police state and punishment? And wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, our current situation is really bringing all this to fore, and there are some approaches that they're working with the police to try to learn this kind of thing and preserve that humanity, right? Yeah, culture of the organization is really tough. So anyway, so that's just affirmation. So and for some of us, it's challenging to think about how to do that and help it feel sincere and come from that deep place where we want it to. So something to keep in mind as you move forward, and just try it. I mean, one of the things next week is when we're practicing, it's like a safe environment to try stuff that may feel a little unusual, and just try it with your colleagues and see how it fits for you, and see if it's going to work. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to reflections, because we'd like to spend some time here, because you will be doing activities around reflections. I know I'm moving kind of fast, but I'm looking at people's faces. Are you okay with the pace so far? It looks like folks are keeping up. All right, thanks. Okay, so again, you have a definition in your workbook. And so in reflections are statements that communicate back what the listener is hearing. And all of us have probably learned about this somewhere in our original schooling or our preparation for our profession. And the thing about thinking about when you're having a conversation where you're really thinking about supporting people towards change is we have a purpose or an intention, and how we sometimes use these things. Like we want to have the spirit of MI be there, or we want to think about change. And so we're going to increase understanding and clarity, communication, and really consider the factors influencing change. And so of course there's simple reflections. And so that's when you just basically repeat back what somebody said. And you can do that a little bit just to buy yourself more time, or just acknowledge that you're actually physically hearing, or you can rephrase it a little bit. So those are simple reflections. But you can't do that too much because it gets boring and it's kind of parroting. It doesn't feel very good. One important thing to remember is that when you do a reflection, it's a statement. Your voice doesn't rise in inflection at the end of it when you say a reflection. So it's the difference between saying, it's been a really tough year for you, versus it's been a really tough year for you. Okay, and we all would interpret the first one as a question and the second one as a statement, and reflections are statements. And just a tip for all my female colleagues here, in our society, women have been socialized to be more hesitant, and we have an even greater tendency to do this than men. It's a thing to notice in yourself and start to think about how can I learn not to be always sounding so tentative. Okay. So complex reflections are really where we want to go. Because a complex reflection adds emphasis or meaning. So this is our sincere desire to understand that other person and really be thinking about the dilemma that they're facing. And you've seen this in an iceberg image used in a lot of different ways because it's such a helpful tool for us to understand what's happening. A simple reflection is just reflecting the surface, what people said on the surface. A complex reflection is going deep, okay? So conversations have like a horizontal path, but there's also something vertical that needs to happen in a conversation. For people to be ready, willing, and able to make change, there's things that need to be drawn forth that are below the surface. And it's those things like values. Because change that's linked to a person's values are more likely to stick. And that's one of the reasons why the affirmations are so important and why we also think about reflections, because we can get underneath what's going on and help people really think about change in light of who they are as a person, what's going on for them, what meaning it has for them. So we need to be able to think about going deep. Mm-hmm. And for some of us, like trained as a nurse, I was pretty comfortable with the surface, right? And felt that only other people with more training could go deep. But it turns out you can also, no matter what your background is, learn to just be gently with somebody as they explore that depth of their personality. Okay. I'll just stop there for a moment, take a breath.
Did you say it's kind of like reading between the lines?
Mm-hmm. That's one way to think about it.
Yeah.
So I have a young guy in the hospital right now that I've been doing this with. He tells me the truth all the time. When he uses crystal meth or fentanyl, he says, yeah, but I use crystal meth or fentanyl. So it's all good. He's always telling me the truth so I know what's going on with him. Mm-hmm. And he's done very well. So I came across a quote in another program that I'm doing. And I brought it into him. I said, this is the quote. It said, truth-telling is a powerful medication. It is a fire that lights our way for others. When we speak our firepower, we join a long line of warriors against injustice. Each one of us is born with an innate power and purpose, a sacred direction for which we have been created. Our task is to find that place where we belong and to do the work there. So 17 years old, I picked up what he said to me. I went along and said, this is what you're looking for, and this is what you want. And he's sort of like, oh my God, you hear me. And I said, at 17, you're looking for things. You don't have it together. You're not supposed to have it together. That's okay. Our job is to help you get there. We will walk with you in this journey. And we'll deal with one addiction at a time. You can go out and smoke. I know you're doing crystal meth. Let's do your fentanyl. That's the most dangerous one right now. And we'll go from there. And he just like, yes, that's what I want. He's on Suboxone. He's going to YD33. I said, what is your plan? What do you want to do? How do you want to get there? Really hitting at what he wants. And they said, let's look at this together. I said, what is your sacred power? What do you want to do? Mm-hmm. And everything just came out.
Yeah, boy.
So it's interacting with him. It's hitting him deeply where he's at. Mm-hmm. And it's very age appropriate, right? It's very age appropriate, not knowing what you want to do, mm-hmm. but knowing you want to do something, mm-hmm. and helping him figure out what does he want to do.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in what you said too. Yeah. Thinking about from the MI lens because you were partnering with him, expressing that partnership, walking with you, and that empathy. Lots of stuff there. Thanks, Jim. So going deep. I think the other thing too that's really interesting about working with teenagers and adolescents is they can, feel things so deeply, like the injustice in the world, and being able to take that power, that firepower, right, that strength, really to turn the world around. Yeah, thanks. Okay. We're going to talk about 3 ways to form complex reflections. There's many other ways and there's different ways to think about this, but these seem to be the most helpful, for getting more acquainted, better acquainted with MI type skills. And these are used like in lots of other kinds of conversational styles too. And so the first one is just about making a guess about what's underneath. And the guess is again, that intention of my guess is there because I want to understand, you know, it comes from a sincere place. You can also reflect the person's ambivalence, and we're going to look at each of these in more detail. So that's the both sides of the change. I'm attracted to it, I'm repelled by it, I'm drawn to it, not so sure. Okay, so that sort of thing. And you can do paraphrase and continue the story. Okay, so these are just 3 ways to think about reflection. So let's look at each of these. First one, making a guess about what's underneath. So if you look at page 28, you'll actually see there's a little space here for us to think about this. So you can guess an emotion, or you can guess the meaning of what the person said. And sometimes it's making a guess. Again, people think about assumptions. And this is making a guess because I want to understand. It's not an assumption because I think I've got it figured out already. Those are 2 very different things. This is, I really want to understand what you're saying here. So I'm gonna reflect back what I think is meant to see if we can come to an understanding. And it's like if you've learned communication, it's the closing the loop in the communication. This is one of those basic skills we use to kind of close the loop, okay? So let's just go ahead and think about making a guess, all right, about what the meaning is when somebody says something to you. So we're gonna say, somebody said to you, I wish I was more social, okay? And what could you reflect? We're not gonna ask a question, we're gonna reflect. What could they mean? So go ahead and unmute yourself. What might they mean? So you want me to do reflection back to them. What would you say?
Just that they want to talk more.
Okay, so how we do that as a reflection, okay? It'd be nice to have more people to talk to, would be a way to do that, Jan, as a statement, right? Yeah. Okay. What else might they mean?
Something along the lines of like, how are they filling their day?
Ah, okay, so let's turn that into a statement, all right? It's hard to find ways to fill up your day. Okay. This is also one of the things to learn, is because we are so used to asking questions, is how do I turn my question into a statement, right? And which gets to something else. Why don't we just ask questions all the time? What happens if you just ask questions?
Not listening.
What's that, Jim?
You're not listening.
You're not listening because you're so busy finding your questions. What else is a downside of just asking questions all the time?
You're directing.
It's a way to direct the conversation. What are other people thinking? What else? Why don't we just ask questions all the time?
Feel like an interrogation.
If it can feel like an interrogation.
Closing them down.
Yeah, some people do close down.
Not collaborative.
It's not as collaborative, yeah. Yeah, because we are in control of the conversation when we're asking questions. Yeah. And this is a tough habit to break.
The nurse in me is just like, why wouldn't you ask questions, Connie?
Yeah, it's a really tough habit to break.
I really want to ask a question about this statement.
Oh, so go ahead. What's the question? Let's turn it into a statement.
I would want to ask, why do you feel you need to be more social? Are you feeling pressure to be more social? Or is that a genuine desire that you want to be more social? I want to know which it is.
So Alana, you just said some great things that you can turn into reflection. So like there's some pressure to be more social, if that's what you think they mean. And they might say, oh no, it's just this kind of like, since we've had all this, staying at home stuff, I'm just really finding I actually do miss people. I mean, if you guess wrong, they're going to tell you even more than you would have even thought of if you'd ask a question. Because if I ask a question, I'm directing the conversation away, and it may go somewhere totally different if I just make my statement. So that's a really good insight, Alana. Yeah. Somebody else, what do you think is going on here? I wish I was more social.
Well, I think tagging on to where Alana was going, it could be something like, it's important to you to be more connected. And then just see, like, because it's like, what does that mean? What does more social mean? What's important about that,
Yeah, and they could say, yeah, I'm really missing all of my friends, it's, we don't have really good ways to interact. Or they could say, well, you know what, I'm really just bored. I mean, you don't know, right? Yeah.
Or it could be like, I mean, because I was thinking too, I was trying to, there's a bit of ambivalence in this statement too, right? It's like, so it's challenging to be social, but you want to be more connected.
So
it's,
you could.
you know,
Yeah, so that actually really leads to the next one, right? So that is the second way that we can do this. So we make a guess about what's underneath, or you can reflect both sides of the ambivalence, which is where Stacy was going. And Alana was kind of sensing there's maybe a tug here with this person about feeling pressure to be more social, but maybe that's really not their style. And you don't know that. So you could do what Stacy said, and you could say, you know, there's some pressure to feel more social, and you're kind of, you know, happy about the way things are. You don't know. You know, they'll tell you what they think about that. Okay. Let's deconstruct this double-sided reflection a little bit more. That's what we call these when you reflect the ambivalence, because there's the two sides in all of our heads around change, right? So let's say somebody says to you, I found out I was pregnant a week ago. I want to do the right thing for the baby. My friend calls me every time there's a party, and I just can't keep myself from going and having a drink. Okay. So what's the sustained talk? What's the talk about staying the same or not wanting to change that this person's saying? Where is that in this sentence? Go ahead, shout it out.
I just can't keep myself from going and having a drink.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, there's a typo in there too. That's supposed to say baby. Okay. Where's the change talk? Where's the stuff in favor of moving forward?
I want to do the right thing for the baby.
Yeah, I want to do the right thing for the baby, right? Okay, good. Yeah, so we've got those things there. Okay, so when we're forming a double-sided reflection, and this is a really great thing that indicates that you hear this dilemma, and we know this is normal, right? It's normal to feel two ways about things, and so you just want people to, you know, so you get it, because people are so used to being persuaded to make change that it's very refreshing when you're talking to somebody who gets it, that it's not just a slam dunk, this is easy to do. Okay.
So Connie, is there more than one change talk in there? Like, I found out I was pregnant. Is that not a change talk item?
It certainly could be, right?
Or
it
like
certainly could be.
Sustained talk. My friend calls me every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's
yep.
Okay.
Those could be parts of it too. You bet, right? Yeah. This person actually did a pregnancy test, right? So there's something really positive happening there. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And there's this habit from the friend. So there's even more there. And so you had to pick how much you're going to reflect back. Because when we're reflecting, we can't say back everything somebody said to us, because then the conversation is just twice as long. So we're going to pick what we're going to say. And so these are just the two parts that were picked in this particular example. And the way we form a complex, double-sided reflection, this kind of reflection, is you do the sustained talk, the argument against change first. And then we use the word and as much as possible in between the two, because they do exist simultaneously. And we put the change talk seconds. And you want to do the right thing for the baby. It's hard to say no to a drink, and you want to do the right thing for the baby. Okay. Or you could, the second part, because if you don't want to use the word you could say, and it's important to do the right thing for the baby. Or you're concerned about the baby, or whatever you want to say, right? You can paraphrase that. Why do we put the change talk second?
you don't want to end on the problem.
We don't want to end on the problem.
Or, you know, it's the last thing they heard. then they go back to talking about, yeah, it's hard to say no to drink, and potentially miss that, what's important about, you know, doing the right thing.
Yeah, Nancy, is that where you were headed to? Yeah, she's nodding her head. Yeah, there's this recency. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I also think it opens up more conversation to explore that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to do the right thing, like tell me more about that, and
yes,
explore that more.
Yes, yeah, that's so right, because human beings, we have this recency phenomenon, and when we're having conversations, we usually pick up where the person left off, and so we usually stay with them on that thread. Not always, but it's more likely that they will. Why do you suppose the word "and" is favored over any other thing you could put in there? You could put "but," or you could put "yet," or you could. Those are the things I hear the most. But why is "and"? We encourage "and," do you think?
it implies an equality. So you're not judging that one of those things is better than the other.
Yeah, thanks, Alana. Yeah.
It's neutral and it links. It's
What's that?
neutral,
It's more neutral.
and it links.
Yeah, and they do exist simultaneously in this person's head, right? She's saying them to you, and this is reality. Yeah, so we try to use the word and. Okay, and so just the reminders, you have your little tip: sustain talk first and change talk second. It's not the end of the world if it goes the other way around sometimes, but that's one of the things that we encourage, because that's the way you guide the conversation. We're gently checking out, seeing if this person is going to stay with us on this change conversation, right? And they may need to talk more about how hard it is for a while, and then we're going to go there with them for a little while, and then we're going to check out again to see if they're ready to keep talking about change. Okay, so this is a little bit of the strategically using these, but they come from that sincere place in our spirit of MI, where we really want to partner with them, understand what's going on, and have that empathy. Okay. All right. So, all right, I got 10 minutes to do one more reflection type, and then summaries, which are really just kinds of reflections and a question. So the third type, after making a guess, which could be an emotion or meaning, or reflecting the ambivalence, that double-sided reflection, the third type is paraphrase and continue the story. And again, you think about, when you might want to use this kind of a thing. You're going to paraphrase, say back what you've heard to them, and you're going to say what you think might be next in the story. And you're just checking again, just to see if, what's happening in their mind, okay? So here's an example. How you can construct this kind of a thing. Somebody says to you, I'm overwhelmed. And then you might say, there's so much going on for you right now, and you're wondering how to move forward and make a change. Okay. I'm just putting something forward there to see if that's where they're at. And they might say, oh no, I can't even think about it right now. There's too much going on. And so then I know I need to stay with them a little bit more and listen to that more. Or they might say, yeah, and I've been thinking there's this tiny step that maybe if I just started here, I could get a handle on this. So I'm offering it there to really see where that person is. Okay. So paraphrase and continue the story is another really great way to think about reflecting back what you're hearing and guiding the conversation. Okay. And another thing to think about, and I haven't solved the problem. So that would be saying, there's so much going on right now, and you've decided that the next thing you want to do is to make contact with a parole officer and make sure you understand, I didn't do that. I didn't fix it for them. I just explored whether or not they were ready to change. That make sense? On some level? Yeah, okay. They make more sense when you have them in reality and in context and stuff. Okay. All right. So we've talked about our open-ended questions, affirmations, and reflections, both simple and complex. Simple reflections are great. They buy us some time, help us just kind of, pace the conversation a little bit, but you need to get into the complex reflections to really be able to talk to people about change. And now we're going to talk about summaries. So summaries. So this is page 33. All right. And there is a reflections worksheet and that's going to be a homework assignment. So if you're following along in your book, you'll see there's an opportunity to practice your reflections there. So number 33, page 33, we have summaries. And so summaries are really an extended reflection, and they end with a question. And so summaries are used strategically in the conversation, okay? You don't want to be summarizing all the time. It makes the conversation too long. That is actually the recording I was listening to this morning was just all summaries, and it really was a hard conversation to listen to. So if you're using a summary, you might use a summary because you just want to check in and see if you're getting it, if you're getting the person's story, okay? So if somebody's talking to me, I'm just going to pick things out of the conversation, reflect it back to them and say something like, did I get that right? Or what else is there? I'm just trying to get it. I might use a summary to focus the conversation, in which case I might pick out the things they've told me. You might lose your housing, your boyfriend's really on your case about stuff, and you've been thinking about maybe it's time to stop using. Is there one of those that's the place you want to start? Okay, so you using it, my question would be focusing. Or you might want to use it to transition the conversation. So say I'm talking to somebody about stress management, maybe finding other ways to manage instead of using alcohol. And they've been, lots of different things have been talked about. And I might say, well, we've been talking about the possibility of meditation or joining some kind of a support group, or, you know, building more physical activity, or just getting out of nature into your life. Is there, you know, one of those that might be ready to make a plan about? So I'm just checking out to see if they're even ready to go farther with me. So summaries are used deliberately in the conversation for transitions, or confirming understanding, or focusing. Okay, so they have a purpose. So one way to imagine a summary is to think about it like it's a bouquet. You're picking the flowers out of the things they've said, and you're gathering it up and handing it back to them and ending with a question. Okay, so that's kind of the way that works. I'm going to show you a couple of summaries, and just tell me about where you think in the conversation, or what the purpose might be for these two summaries. So maybe somebody says, maybe this is a reflection you use, and this is an interesting one, Danica. It has a whole bunch of yous in it. You're worried about your relationship with your mother, and you disagree about parenting, argue about money and your life choices, and this may start to damage how you feel about each other. What else can you tell me? What do you think the purpose of that reflection was?
I think focus on the positive attributes of the relationship, or to draw it out.
To draw it out? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, put some thought into it. Say, you know, like, well, you know, mom has been there for me, or, you know, mom supports me in this way, or whatever. I don't know. Not to focus on the negative side, but look at the positive of the relationship.
That's interesting, because the question is, what else can you tell me?
I almost imagine this would be like, maybe, you know, it could be a few minutes into a conversation where you've already got a lot of information, but you're just kind of like checking back to make sure you got the highlights. And what else do I need to know? Like, it's almost like it would come in the early to middle half, but you've already talked about a few things. So it's like focusing, maybe, or making sure you've got all the relevant parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Stacey. Also, I feel like it suggests to me that that person hasn't explicitly stated anything that they're really interested in changing yet. And so I'm wanting them to talk about more that might give me a feeling like, okay, that's where maybe we want to focus and start talking about change.
Yeah, I kind of with you, I think this is fairly early in the conversation, and it's fairly neutral, because it's reflecting back both some, you know, worried about the relationship is maybe a change talk, and the disagreement is kind of a sustained talk part of it. So it's reflecting both. And I think it's eliciting. So that's the spirit of MI. I'm trying to evoke, you know, well, what else is there? You know, I want the full picture before I start. Which is another thing we'll talk about even more in the future. If we get everything out on the table first, it saves us down the road, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the second one here. So we've talked about wanting to get better housing, needing to feel more social, and being worried about how much smoking is costing you. Where do you want to go from here? What do you think the purpose of that summary might be?
I think focusing on one of these areas, because those are all three huge areas.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this is a focusing one. You know, where do you want to go from here? Where do you want to get started? Yeah.
I'm almost wondering if it's kind of a tool when there's just so much going on. Like, as a clinician, we're kind of a little overwhelmed of where do we go? And then it tosses it back to, like, I've heard these different pieces. Where do you want to go from here?
Yes. Summaries are just brilliant ways to help the conversation. Yes, and to help yourself in the conversation. Yeah.
Because I find it sometimes, like with the nurses, and they come back and tell me about their clients, I'm a little overwhelmed. Like, I'm not even sure where to go.
And how much better to have the focus determined by the person, right? Than us trying to guess, right? Because invariably we guess wrong, right? Yeah. Okay. All righty. So that's the basics of the ORs. So if you look on page 34, you just have a handy dandy page that just summarizes all the ORs, so what those definitions or descriptions were and the purposes are. And then there's also a little bit of information just to kind of as a guide for you to think about these particular skills and things. And so, and I realize we're just at the end of the hour here. For people who are first learning MI, we're hoping for at least equal questions to reflections. Skilled counselors actually do usually 4 reflections for every question. And you're really deliberate in the conversation about what you choose to ask, affirm, and reflect. And you don't have to do the ORs in any particular order. I have had people mistake that's an implied order. You just use them however, whatever makes sense in the conversation. Okay, so because I know I need to let you go, one thing to do now is to look back at that helpful responses questionnaire that you did before you started and go back and look at what things you were doing. Were you using open-ended questions or affirmations or reflections or summaries? Or maybe you were doing, probably not a summary because there's only one sentence, or were you doing other things like giving information or advice without permission? Or were you trying to persuade people towards change? Or were you doing some cheerleading or praising in there? Or maybe even confronting people, okay? So really quick, if you go back to your online course page, you will see what things we hope you can do before next, not Monday, sorry, I forgot to change this to Tuesday, next week. Well, I guess then you're done a day before. Anyway, reflections worksheet, page 30 is things that Becky said. So go ahead and see if you can come up with some reflections for Becky. You'll have a little bit of time in the activity session next week with Lori to share some of those. Also write a summary for that page. So practice writing a summary for page 30. Think about using ORs during your work. There's actually a place in there you can comment on it in the online course page. And then review that Ask, Tell, Ask online module, because that's the last skill. So I know folks need to go. Next week, Lori will be with you for the activity session. So thanks for letting me really whip through all that really quick. There'll be lots of times to talk about all of these skills as they get applied. So anyway, thanks so much for being here.